I'm usually the person my friends trust when we're going somewhere unfamiliar. I'm not exactly paranoid, but I like knowing where we're going, how long it'll take to reach our destination, and where we can stop if something goes wrong. I've always been that way. If we're taking a long drive, I'll check the route beforehand, making sure I knew about gas stations before a road trip even started, and exits with real bathrooms instead of a locked porta-john behind a boarded-up gas station. My friends called it excessive. I called it the reason none of us had ever been stuck somewhere with a quarter tank and no plan. We'd spent the weekend at Dana's cousin's wedding, 2 states over, and by Sunday night, we were 4 hours into the drive home, arguing about a podcast none of us had finished. Marcus was in the back seat with his hoodie pulled over his eyes, half asleep. Dana had her feet on the dash, which she knew I hated and did anyway. The highway had gone from 4 lanes to 2 a while back, and then the 2 lanes had gone from street lit to nothing, just our headlights and a stretch of state route cutting through farmland with no other cars on it for 20 minutes at a stretch. Around 11:30, a set of lights came up behind us, fast, close enough that Dana sat up and said something about tailgaters, and then the lights started flashing, red and blue behind the grill of what looked like a black Suburban. No visible light bar on the roof, just the flashers built into the front end. I pulled over onto the shoulder, grass on one side, a drainage ditch further out. No houses in sight in either direction. 2 men got out, tactical vests, dark cargo pants, and boots. No department name stitched anywhere on them. No patches I could see in my mirror. One carried a flashlight. The other had a rifle slung across his chest, muzzle down, which struck me as a strange thing for a traffic stop, even before anything else about it started going downhill. The one on my side tapped the window with 2 knuckles. I rolled it down. He asked for license and registration in a voice that was like they didn't really have any meaning to them, like he was reading them off a card. I asked what the stop was for. He completely ignored me. He asked where we were headed, then asked again a minute later, phrased slightly differently, like he was checking whether the story changed. The second man walked to the back of the car and started photographing the license plate, then the trunk, then each window, working his way around the whole thing with his phone held sideways. "Step out of the vehicle," the first one said, not asking. We did. Dana's hand found my sleeve and gripped it. Marcus stood with his arms crossed tight against his chest, jaw working like he was chewing on something. The men searched the car for what felt a lot longer than any traffic stop I'd ever heard of, popping the trunk, going through Dana's overnight bag, running a hand under the seats. The whole time, the 2 of them talked to each other in short clipped phrases I couldn't make sense of, numbers and single words. Nothing like the radio chatter I'd heard cops use in movies or on the scanner app my dad kept on his phone. It wasn't exactly code, but I couldn't make anything out of it. One of them photographed the inside of the car, too. Not the contents. Us. I caught the flash go off twice, aimed at my face, and when I asked why, the man just lowered the phone and looked at me until I stopped asking. Marcus tried to say something about needing to know what law we'd broken, and the man near him turned fast enough that Marcus took a step back, hands up before he'd even decided to raise them. Nobody yelled. That was somehow worse. It was all this quiet, like they had all night and no interest in explaining themselves to us. At one point, the 2 of them stepped a few feet off to the side, near the ditch, and had a short exchange low enough that none of us caught the words. The one with the flashlight kept glancing back at us while they talked. Whatever they were deciding, it didn't look like a conversation about a busted taillight. Then, it was over. The second man handed me my license back and said we were free to go. No citation, no warning, no explanation for the search, the photos, any of it. They walked back to the Suburban and sat inside it with the headlights off, while I pulled back onto the road, and I watched them in the mirror the entire time, until a bend in the highway took them out of sight. Nobody talked for the first 10 minutes. Dana's leg was bouncing against the door panel. Marcus kept turning around to check the back window, even though there was nothing back there anymore. We stopped at the next gas station we found, a 24-hour place with too much light, and just stood in the parking lot for a minute before anyone went inside. That's when Dana found it, tucked half under the passenger seat where it must have fallen during the search. A single black zip tie, the thick kind you'd use for tightening car parts rather than cable management, already looped into a circle like someone had started to close it around something and stopped. She held it up between two fingers, and none of us said anything for a while. On the drive the rest of the way home, Dana pulled up the plate number on her phone. She'd written it down out of some nervous instinct while the men were searching the trunk, and the next afternoon she called the state police line just to ask about the stop, probably to put her own head at ease. The woman on the phone put her on hold for a few minutes, came back, and said there was no record of any unit with that plate assigned to that stretch of highway that night. No stop logged under our names either. She suggested Dana had maybe misread a digit. Dana hadn't misread anything. She'd photographed her own note before hanging up, plate number and all, an hour after we'd left them behind on the shoulder. A week later, I was half paying attention to the local news while making dinner when a story came on about a couple found dead in a drainage ditch off the same state route, roughly 10 miles down from where we'd been pulled over. The anchor said the vehicle abandoned near the scene was a black SUV reported stolen out of a county 2 hours west. No plates matched anything registered. No suspects named. The segment ran maybe 90 seconds before they cut to the weather. I called Dana before the broadcast even finished. She'd already seen it. We never went to the police with what we had. The zip tie, the photo of her note. Marcus thought it would sound insane out loud. 2 men in gear who searched us, took our pictures, and then just let us drive off toward home instead of into that ditch. I think we were all a little afraid of what it would mean if someone actually believed us. Donna still has the zip tie. Last I heard, she keeps it in a drawer she doesn't open much. None of us talk about it much. None of us has ever figured out what those 2 men were doing out there that night, or why. Of everyone they could have stopped on that road, they decided to let the 3 of us go. I drive for work more nights than most people would want to. 300 to 400 miles at a stretch, delivering equipment between regional warehouses, usually starting after dark to beat daytime traffic through the cities along my route. 6 years into the job, rest stops had become as familiar to me as my own kitchen. The same chains repeating every 100 miles or so, vending machines I could use half asleep. Then one night, something happened that I can't forget till this day. That night, I was running a route I'd done maybe a dozen times before, a straight shot up the interstate with one planned stop around midnight to stretch my legs and grab coffee before the last stretch home. The rest area sat about halfway, a low building with restrooms and vending machines. A scattering of parking spots lit by tall sodium lamps that buzzed faintly overhead. A handful of trucks parked further out, where their drivers were probably asleep in the cabs. Only 2 other cars sat in the lot when I pulled in, and I noticed one of them because the driver hadn't gotten out. A dark sedan, engine off as far as I could tell, someone sitting behind the wheel facing my direction. People sit in parked cars at rest stops all the time, finishing a call, catching a nap before continuing on. It was very normal, and I didn't think much of it walking past toward the building. Inside, I took maybe 10 minutes, went to the restroom, bought a coffee from the machine that came out lukewarm, as always. While walking back out, the sedan hadn't moved, but the man was no longer inside it. He was standing near my car instead, a few feet from my driver's side door, phone held up in front of his face like he was checking a message, except his eyes weren't on the screen. They were looking me across the lot, the entire walk from the building to my car, like some kind of camera tracking someone. I didn't say anything to him and got in, locked the doors before I'd even started the engine, and pulled out of that lot faster than the speed limit actually allowed, checking my mirrors more than the road for the first mile or two. For some reason, my hand stayed tight on the wheel long after the rest stop disappeared behind me, knuckles pale under the dashboard lights. I told myself it was nothing the whole drive after that. He was probably a man killing time, and it was just a coincidence, and I was feeling nervous because I'd been alone in an empty lot at midnight. About an hour later, I was running low on gas, so I pulled into a station just off the next exit. It was one of those large travel plaza setups with a dozen pumps and a convenience store lit up bright against the dark highway around it. I was still at the pump when the same dark sedan pulled in behind me, 2 pumps down, close enough that I recognized it before I'd even fully processed what I was looking at. Same car, same man behind the wheel. He didn't get out this time, just sat there with the engine running, headlights aimed roughly toward where I stood. My chest went tight instantly, and it made it hard to finish something as simple as pumping gas. I closed the tank without bothering to get the receipt, walked straight into the convenience store instead of back to my car, and told the cashier what had happened at the rest stop and again just now at her pumps. She didn't look surprised. She looked like she was tired, like she'd had this exact conversation more than once before. She told me a man like that had been coming through her station almost every night for the past 2 weeks, always alone, always parking somewhere he could watch whoever pulled in. She said it was never the same person twice, which was the part that she couldn't understand more than anything else about it. She called the local sheriff's non-emergency line for me while I stood at the counter, and an officer arrived in about 15 minutes or so, parking his cruiser at an angle that blocked a clean view of the pumps from the road. By the time he walked in, the sedan had already pulled out, gone before I'd even finished giving my statement. The officer took the report seriously, which I hadn't expected at all. The officer said this station wasn't the only one on the highway that had logged similar complaints over the past couple of weeks. They were mostly truckers, and a few solo travelers like me, always late at night, and the description was nearly identical. He said they'd started building a pattern out of it, plate numbers from 3 separate reports that all traced back to different vehicles. None of them registered to anyone matching what witnesses described behind the wheel, which told him whoever this was knew enough to swap plates between sightings. He walked me out to my car before I left, did a full check around it with his flashlight, and that's when he found it. Both rear valve caps missing from my tires, something I hadn't noticed at the rest stop and wouldn't have thought to check on my own. He explained it flat. No easy way to soften it, that missing valve caps is a known trick, a way to slow leak a tire enough that a driver ends up stranded on a dark stretch of road sometime later without any clue why, an excuse for someone to pull over and offer help to a person. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a long while after that, hands pressed flat against the steering wheel, waiting for the shaking in them to settle. The rest stop worker brought me out a coffee I hadn't asked for and stood with me until I felt steady enough to pull back onto the highway. I called my dispatcher and had someone reroute me through a different exit for the rest of that drive, adding almost 40 minutes to a trip that should have taken half that. I filed a full report the next morning with the same department, and an officer told me over the phone that with 3 separate incidents now on record about the same incidents, they'd started coordinating extra patrols with 2 neighboring counties, treating it as an active case rather than isolated reports. He said without catching the man in the act, an arrest wasn't likely anytime soon, but that the file stayed open and that every new report added something they could eventually get a lead through. I still drive that route for work, though I plan my stops differently each time I go out, sticking to the busiest stations, never anywhere close to empty after dark. I never heard whether the police caught him or not, or the pattern the sheriff's department was building ever closed into something solid enough to put a name to. Some nights, alone under those tall fluorescent lights, I still find myself checking every car in the lot before I get out. watching for someone who isn't doing anything suspicious, waiting to see if I notice. I make the same drive 3 times a year, 6 hours each way to see my parents, a route I know well enough to know which gas stations have decent coffee and which stretches lose cell signal for 20 minutes at a time. I usually leave after work and drive through the night, since the roads empty out and I've never minded the quiet of it, just headlights and whatever podcast I've queued up for the trip. That night, I was maybe 4 hours in, deep into the empty 2-lane highway that cuts through farmland and low hills without a town in sight for long stretches at a time. Around 2 in the morning, I hit a rest area I'd stopped at plenty of times before. A small lot with a single low building, no attendant, no vending machines even. Just restrooms and a couple of picnic tables nobody uses at that hour. The lot was empty except for one other car parked all the way at the far end, lights off. No one visible inside from that distance. I didn't think much of it. Rest areas at that hour sometimes have someone sleeping off a long drive, and an empty dark car sitting isn't unusual enough to worry about a second look. I went inside, and the bathroom was as sparse as the rest of the building. 3 stalls, harsh fluorescent lighting that hummed loud enough to notice in the silence. The furthest stall showed its door shut and latched, the little red occupied marker visible in the gap. I glanced down out of habit, the way you do checking for an open stall, and saw nothing. No feet, no shadow, no shoes visible beneath a door that should have shown something if someone were actually using it. I told myself maybe they were probably adjusting something and used the middle stall instead, which was closer to the door, but that irritated me enough to keep half my attention on that closed one the entire time, despite myself. About a minute in, I heard the latched stall door creak, followed by the sound of someone standing up slowly inside it. And then there was a knock, a single, deliberate knuckle against the divider wall between us. I froze. A second knock came a second later, lower down on the same wall. Then another, lower still. Each one seemed to land wherever I moved, almost like it was following me as I moved. I stopped completely, afraid to even breathe. It wasn't random knocking. Whatever was on the other side was following my movements, matching them along the length of the thin metal wall. By the time I realized what that meant, I could already feel the cold spreading across my skin. I got out of that bathroom faster than I've moved in years, hands shaking too badly to properly wash them at the sink, not stopping to look back at that stall even once on my way to the door. The lot outside felt colder than it had been 10 minutes earlier. Or maybe that was just my own body running hot with adrenaline. I crossed to my car fast, and it wasn't until I had my key already in the door that I noticed the muddy prints along the passenger side, boot-shaped, smeared in a pattern that made it look like someone had gripped the handle and pulled, testing it, before whatever they were doing got interrupted or abandoned. I always lock my doors the second I park. I don't remember consciously checking that night, but the doors were locked when I reached the car, which was the only small mercy in the whole thing. I got in, locked it again out of pure reflex, and pulled out of that lot without a single glance toward the far end where that other car still sat, lights off, unmoving the entire time I'd been inside. I made it maybe 2 miles down the dark highway before headlights appeared behind me, keeping a steady distance, 2 car lengths back, matching my speed exactly whether I sped up or eased off the gas to test it. I tried slowing to well under the limit at one point, hoping whoever it was would pass out of impatience the way any normal driver eventually would. They slowed with me instead, holding that same gap, never once attempting to overtake even on a straight, empty stretch with nothing stopping them. I called 911 with my phone propped against the dash, my voice coming out faster and less steady than I wanted it to as I explained where I was, what had happened at the rest stop, and that a car had been following me at a fixed distance for what felt by then like 20 minutes straight. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asked me to stay calm, to keep both hands on the wheel, and stick to well-lit areas, if any existed along that stretch, and told me a state trooper was already being routed toward my location from a station roughly 15 minutes out. Those 15 minutes felt endless. I kept checking my mirrors every few seconds, the headlights behind me never closing the gap, never falling back either, holding that exact distance. The dispatcher had me describe the vehicle as best I could in the dark. A dark sedan, nothing distinctive beyond its unnerving patience. I saw the trooper's lights come up fast in my rear view a few minutes later, cutting through the dark from a side road ahead, and the moment those lights appeared, the car behind me dropped back hard, then peeled off onto an unmarked side road I didn't even remember passing, gone before the trooper ever got close enough to make out more than a shape. The trooper pulled me over gently to check on me rather than the car that had vanished, and by the time backup arrived to search the side road the other vehicle had turned onto, there was nothing there. No taillights, no dust settling on a gravel shoulder, nothing to suggest which direction it had actually gone once out of sight. They ran a check on the rest area based on my description of the other car parked there, and confirmed a facilities worker had found the bathroom stall door still latched from the inside an hour later during a routine morning check. Empty, with no clear way anyone could have exited without unlatching it, unless they'd gone over the top of the partition itself. I gave a full statement at the station nearest that stretch of highway, walked an officer through everything from the stall to the boot prints to the sustained tail, and got the same answer I think I already expected, that without a plate number or a clear description of the driver, there wasn't a name or a vehicle registration to actually chase down, though they'd flag the rest area and notify the highway patrol covering that corridor to watch for similar reports. I finished the last 2 hours of my drive with my hazards on more than once just to have an excuse to pull into busier gas stations along the way, and I called my parents from the road to tell them I'd be later than planned, without explaining why in any detail I thought they'd actually want to hear at that hour. I still make that same drive 3 times a year, but I only go through that stretch during the day now, even if it means dealing with traffic and adding extra time to the trip. I never found out who was in that stall, whether it was the same person driving that sedan, or where either of them went once that trooper's lights disappeared behind me on a dark stretch of road that never gave up a single answer about where that car actually turned.